Rock-a-bye, Billy, please don't you cry. It's not your fault you have that strange eye. Stay safe with Mommy, you'll never fall. And we'll always love you, sharp angles and all.
So, the Book of Bill has come out, and the entire Gravity Falls fandom is frothing at the mouth, myself included. So far, the book has revealed some interesting things, like how Bill was kicked out of hell for being too annoying, making Old Man Yowie all but confirmed, and giving us Bill Cipher's sad boy hours of him being haunted by the memory of his family that he killed purely on accident. An act evidently so traumatic that he can't even recount the events without blacking out. I never would have expected them to find the right balance of sad backstory fueling his actions and the fact that he's still a homicidal maniac to just really add so much more to him. Congrats on not woobifying him, it makes my Bill Kinney heart happy to see. New codes are being found every day between cross-referencing stain textures within the book and using thisisnotawebsite.com to uncover secrets, but I'm here to theorize about one particular aspect of the Book of Bill. Bill's family and home dimension hold some very interesting dynamics, and it goes past just the sad boy hours of him only drawing red and blue triangles in art therapy. It goes further than he shoes too big for he got darn feet, and feeds a theory that I've had about Bill Cipher for years. Seeing this image within the book caused intense neuron activation in me, because back in 2015, the book this novel references was one of my special interests. A hyperfixation, if you will. A romance of dimensions and a tragedy of geometry. Flatland. Many have brought it up in passing in reference to the Book of Bill, and while I will be making a video strictly about Flatland and its terrible, horrible film adaptations later, I want to focus on how it relates to Bill and the depth of his character, pardon the pun. More specifically, I intend to focus on how the recently uncovered Lullaby reveals so much more about him than you may first think. Hey, hi-yo, ya out there to all my big brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, and of course, mommies, daddies, siblings, and guardians. It's me, your bite-sized baddie and favorite little brother Mark. Okay, so before I can really get into the Book of Bill, we have to go back. All the way to 10 years ago? Was this really a decade ago? Okay, I'm turning to dust. Back to 10 years ago, where Alex Hirsch held an AMA on Reddit in character for Bill Cipher. Why is this important? For a few reasons we'll get into, but for right now, we need to focus on the question, do you know what spawned your existence? To which Bill answered, Edwin Abbott Abbott had a decent idea. Who is this man? Well, he was a schoolmaster, theologian, Anglican priest, and just so happened to write the novella Flatland, a romance of multiple dimensions. It was a satirical commentary on the state of Victorian English society he lived in, as well as one of the first written proposals explaining multidimensionality. You know, proposing the idea of the second, third, and fourth dimensions. A veritable Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy of its time. While this could be a meta-joke about Bill as a character being inspired by the series, I believe it's more along the lines of Bill saying, this guy's fiction is pretty close to what my reality was, a la that one scene from The Good Place. Flatland centers on a 2D universe where a sphere tries to prove the existence of the third dimension to the two-dimensional beings residing within the titular universe, ultimately resulting in his square acolytes' ostracization. Poignant as that may be to Bill's story, a lot of things from biology to Flatland society can be applied to Bill Cipher. Also, thank you Moonlight Layla 99 on the Gravity Falls wiki for making this compiled document of every question and answer to the AMA, because we will be returning to it. But at the moment, let's go over some Sparks notes on Flatlander anatomy. They're covered in hair or feelers, like amoeba, have an eye for sight likely positioned in the center of one of their planes or at the tip of one of their vertices. The males are all shapes, Females are lines, or very thin rectangles with a tapered point. And one more thing of note is that only regular, equal-sided shapes are permitted to live in society, with one exception that I'll get into later in this video. Now, immediately we can assume this world is slightly different as Bill draws his parents both as triangles, so the whole line thing doesn't mean as much here. But I think that the other known Flatlander anatomical traits are still very important. The first line of the song goes, "Rock-a-bye Billy, please don't you cry. It's not your fault you have that strange eye." I think that's a good place to start. Here, I have to take a step aside to address the couple of theory TikToks that I've been sent numerous times that I'll just go ahead and discuss as if they're the same thing, since they seem to either feed off of one another or be inspired by each other. Got it? Got it. The theorist explains that the fundamentals of the story dictate that beings can only perceive a dimension lesser than they truly are. So a 3D being can only truly experience 2D, and a 2D being can only see 1D, and so on. Their theory also proposes that Bill has a strange eye because others in his world have 0 eyes, and cite Flatlanders relying on feeling and hearing to support that. This is factually incorrect. I don't want to dunk on or have someone decide to be a freak and send hate to anyone out there because I say I disagree with their theory on Flatland and Bill's dimension of Euclidia. Wee-woo. Disclaimer, I'm not trying to hate on them or their brains or anything like that, but if you're claiming to be a fanatic of the novella Flatland and you say factually wrong things about it, I'm using my one autism card to say no. You're not in this episode. I would want to ask if this person actually read the story or if they watched one of the terrible movies and skimmed the novella Wikipedia page for more info. In truth, it's probably that their information stemmed from the more easily accessible but factually incorrect films. While you can easily find free audiobooks of the 113-page novella online, I get that it's probably easier for most to take 2 hours and watch a 720p video on YouTube. If you can stomach reading the short story or listening to the audiobook though, I highly recommend them as not only cool literature, but great commentaries on the dangers of racism, classism, and misogyny. Getting back on track. Every Flatlander has an eye, and the book talks at length about men of class being expected to perfect the art of sight identification, knowing someone's shape by glance of their vertex and angle, and the shading within their universe's miasma, dubbed fog. Sight identification is one of the biggest reasons regular shapes are the only ones permitted to live, with limited exception, because anything else would make sight identification impossible. Yes, lower classes such as women, who are so thin that their eyes are tiny and thus bad for seeing, triangles and some squares have heightened use of their hearing and vocal cords to where some can even mimic the voices of nobility and circles, but only women and the mentally deficient, so to speak, are expected and allowed to touch identify people past childhood. Sight is something that the square protagonist of the novella prides himself on and is inherent to the story, with the sphere literally showing the square 3 dimensions. As I said, I'm making a video that goes more in depth about Flatland itself later on, so I'm just giving a very bare-bones, surface-level explanation here. But suffice it to say, I think the theory comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of Flatland's principles in physiology and the ideas the story proposes. Like I mentioned earlier, we can assume that Flatlanders and Euclideans have slightly different physiology from the fact that all genders are shapes. But I don't believe it would go so far to say that Euclideans have no eyes. Even if others in their dimension had the same eye mutation in the past, why would they have doctors specifically dedicated to eyes if it was such a rare abnormality? Why would they bother dubbing his eye strange if just having one whatsoever would be synonymous with peculiarity? In a series like Gravity Falls, where everything matters, I don't think that adding an ancillary word just to add to a rhyme scheme would really make a lot of sense. Furthermore, the exact opposite of what was proposed earlier about the perception of dimensions is actually true. 2D beings can only see 2 dimensions, but a third unseeable dimension exists for them. I guess in a way that works with the sentiment that we as 3D beings only see a 2D mental approximation of our world, but it's just a bit off the mark. This is even touched on within the novella, where the square suggests that a fourth dimension could exist to the three-dimensional sphere, and the sphere takes it as a failing of his own teachings. But that is part of the satirical commentary that the story is trying to make. Those who are your betters considering themselves the highest, never even acknowledging or thinking that there could be something above them. So, like we as humans cannot see whatever our fourth dimension is, Flatlanders and Euclideans cannot fundamentally see the third dimension that exists just above their own. See, a two-dimensional reality could only be as tall as its inhabitants. There's no wiggle room or up and down. No wonder Bill would describe the place as suffocating. You're literally touching the edges of your world at all times. However, with his eye in the center of his face, he would not only be able to see up into the third dimension at the edge of his own universe, he would be functionally blind within his dimension because up is the only way he can look. To a Flatlander or Euclidean, he would appear to have his eye inside of his body. He could see in a direction nobody else physically could, meaning the only thing he could see is the stars. He talked about being able to see something incomprehensible, while likely being unable to actually see those in his own dimension before developing his magics. That idea is backed up by the next line in the song, "Stay safe with mommy, you'll never fall." My friend and fellow Bill lover Mally Malware pointed out another lullaby she found when exploring thisisnotawebsite.com that I think is particularly of note here. As soon as I saw the lines, my brain immediately said, "That's to the tune of Hush Little Baby." I won't read it out here, I've already subjected you to enough of my poor quality singing. This seems pretty straightforward as an explanation of how Bill's home dimension worked. A bit cog-like and monotonous, literally looping around when you get too far to the side of the plane. However, there are a couple of things we can extrapolate from it. Mainly, this ditty talks about how you can never fall out of the world because it loops. Thus, Bill would never fall, implying that the Rockabye Billy line could possibly mean you are physically incapable of harming yourself this way, instead of mommy and daddy will keep you safe. Two reassurances with vastly different emotional contexts. One being a potentially dismissive, "Don't worry, silly, that's impossible," and the other a caring, "Don't be scared, you are loved." With that being said, it would possibly still be detrimental to run into another shape. Bill could possibly hurt himself or someone else if he didn't stay in line with the other shapes. It's very likely that he needed to be guided by his family verbally or physically. Remember, he likely couldn't see within his dimension unless he stepped out of it, meaning his peripheral vision was all he had to guide him, if that much. From everything we've seen in these lullabies, if we're to assume that they're ones Bill's parents would sing to him and not just ones he himself made up for comfort, it appears that they loved him. Bill says within the book that he was universally beloved, but we know that Bill is a self-centered and unreliable narrator. In all likelihood, he was bullied for either his disability or wild claims of sight. Heck, even his family that loved him took him to the eye doctor to see if his disability could be fixed altogether with medication that they knew caused him pain. It's what most parents think is best for their children in situations like this. It happens here in our world too. A parent will think that the pain of a medical procedure or a type of therapy that might fix their child's physical or mental disability is for the best, even if it's experimental or has shown that it's not working whatsoever. We also have to consider the possibility that Bill's medicine was not even really meant to fix his eye or his sight, and was either something intended to counteract whatever mental illness they assumed he had from his explanations of the third dimension, or was intended to blind him altogether. Which, speaking of Flatlander medical practices, in Flatland, I told you that only shapes of equal side length and angle are permitted to live. Remember? Regular shapes. The main exception to this rule is with isosceles triangles, a shape with two sides longer than its third. They are sharp yet sturdy, and within a few generations will even out to have a proper angle and length at each side to create an equilateral triangle. This improperness in configuration means they are made to be laborers of the lowest class and soldiers. While other shapes with minor discrepancies not seen as too unreasonable are sometimes also forced into a life of servitude, the main shape within the lowest class class of misfits and outcasts are isosceles triangles. Usually if a child is born with an abnormality, they're allowed to grow for a while to see if it'll even out on its own, to let them grow into their sides, if you will. But if the discrepancy is far too vast, such as being unrecognizable as a regular shape or having too great of a deformity, the child is painlessly culled and consumed. Take that potentially cannibalistic note with a grain of salt, but if a shape is not too badly malformed and the parents worry that they won't grow out of their poor configuration, the child is taken to be corrected. It isn't explained how, but judging by Flatland Society's standards, I would not be surprised if it included compression or even surgically removing increments of a child's irregular sides to shore them up. Which makes this question from the AMA a lot darker. Will always love you, sharp angles and all. Sure, it's probably just a throwaway joke, but what if it wasn't? In a series where the coffee stains on a page are a code, I don't think it's wrong to take every piece of seemingly unimportant dialogue into consideration. What if this child was not only born with his eye in the wrong place, but with his sides malformed? With parents who seem as caring as Bill's, I doubt they would want a life at the lowest rung of society for their boy. What if his parents, though well-meaning like most in this situation, exposed him to medical torture in search of letting their child have a more normal life and body? A boy with a few sharper angles and more even sides will have a better life than one doomed by a flawed class system. A boy who is blind and subdued is better accepted than one constantly talking about an imaginary and potentially blasphemous third dimension, depending on how far we want to infer the Flatlander ideology goes. Of course, he would only want to show them the stars even more after that, to prove he wasn't unwell or lying. Learning how to step out of his dimension once he realized what he was seeing would be fairly easy, especially with it just being right there, close enough to touch. A world only as big as you are tall, and nobody thinking to try and reach past the confines of what they know, because to them, that's all that exists. He could prove to them that he wasn't a liar and that he wasn't seeing things. He could prove that the third dimension was real and that his parents didn't need to worry about him so much. All he needed to do was change their perspective. Forcefully. His dimension and everyone within it died, unable to fit into the extra plane Bill tried to show them. Why did they die if Bill, who is physiologically the same as them, could step out? There are a couple of theories as to this. One being that since the dimension is only as tall as its inhabitants, nobody had a fully sealed body other than Bill. You know, their skin only being visible to others within their dimension, not even thinking that they're not entirely closed off. But when you pick them up, they just kind of fall apart. You know, like a poorly wrapped sushi roll. But that would mean that Bill did it more than once, and while you could possibly argue that after he maybe tried picking up his parents and they fell quite literally to pieces of viscera and organs within his hands, he kind of just went a little bit nutty and kept doing it over and over again, I think something more substantial and immediate would have to happen. I believe it's because instead of pulling them out of their plane one by one, the same way he pulled himself out, he probably tried to move the plane itself. To show everyone at once that the stars were real, like picking up a piece of paper to show it against the light, like bringing a microscope slide too close to the lens, like a snail egg crushed underneath a glass. They stayed in place as the universe moved out from under them, shattering not only Bill's home, but their small and fragile bodies. Cosmic horror of the most classical variety. Maybe that vast sacrifice was what earned him his other magics. After all, killing an entire universe, no matter how small and delicate, will certainly have some karmic result. Or maybe he simply was just built different and born with magic powers. Who knows? As I said, we can't really trust that triangle's words whatsoever, so everything he states within the book should be taken as a starting point at best. Maybe other than the sadness that killing his family brought, he discovered that he enjoyed the feeling. Maybe the act kind of just made him snap. Who knows? But what do you think? Did you notice something that I missed? What are your theories about Bill and his home? Would you like me to talk more about the Book of Bill? There's so much within this thing, and I have a pretty good scanner app on my phone, so I can get some high-quality images of these pages. Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're there, leave our word of the day, Jasper, in a comment so I know that you made it to the end of the video like a real one. Thank you very much for making it here, by the way. I appreciate you watching to the end, just like I appreciate my wondabulous Patreon supporters. I can't make these videos without you guys, so I appreciate your support. At our brother, sibling, sister tier, we have Viri, Miss Mercuriel, Minnow, and Ash Valentine. At our mommies, daddies, and guardians tier, we have Kiria Makoto, Kai, and Mary. And at our gods, goddesses, and deities tier, we have gods and punks. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe, it really helps out the channel, and it means a whole lot to me. And I will see you in the next video. I hope you have an absolutely scrubdangulous day. Bye-bye.